March 1995. A dentist who farms his family's ground on weekends stands behind a borrowed tractor built in 1952. The rear hitch is broken, so he loops a 20-foot log chain around the tractor seat instead, ties the other end around a cluster of sapling stumps, and climbs up. He gives it throttle. 1.5 seconds later, the tractor is standing straight up on its rear wheels, and then it is on top of him. That tractor belongs to the same family of machines this film is about. Ford-Ferguson, Ferguson, Massey Ferguson. Different badges stamped onto the same idea, built across 3 decades, sold by the hundreds of thousands, and, by any honest count, responsible for more dead American farmers than any other single machine in the history of agriculture. It is also the tractor that rebuilt farming after the Second World War. The machine that took a continent starved for labor and handed one man, alone, a plow he could actually afford. Both of those sentences are true. Neither one cancels the other out. Here is the part almost nobody tells you. The people who built this thing knew exactly what would stop the killing, more than 15 years before they did anything about it. And when they finally moved, they left almost every tractor already sold out in the field, unprotected, on purpose. That's the machine we're taking apart today. The machine that never stopped killing. Start with the number that should not be true, and is. A rear overturn, the kind that put that dentist under 2,000 pounds of Detroit steel, takes about 1.5 seconds from the first jolt to the tractor landing flat on its back. Not 5 seconds. Not 3, 1.5 seconds. That is less time than it takes to say the word tractor twice. There is no bracing for it, no jumping clear, no last-second grab for the wheel. The machine simply stands up, pivots on its own rear axle like a door swinging on a hinge, and comes down on whoever is sitting in the seat. This has been happening on American farms for close to 100 years. Tractor overturns are, to this day, the single leading cause of death on American farms, ahead of grain bins, ahead of combines, ahead of bulls. A machine built to pull a plow kills more farmers than anything else they own. In a typical modern year, the number runs somewhere between 90 and 130 dead, and that count is almost certainly low, because plenty of small operations aren't required to report a death to anyone at all. Here's the part that should stop you. 80% of the people who die this way are not green kids who don't know what they're doing. They are experienced operators, men and women who have been running this exact tractor for 20, 30, 40 years, who know the field, know the slope, know the machine, down to the sound of its own engine. One farmer in 10 who spends a career on a tractor will roll one at least once. Some of them walk away. A great many of them do not. Now sit with this. The system that put that tractor in a farmer's hands, the specific piece of engineering this whole film is about, was invented for the express purpose of stopping tractors from flipping over backward. That was the entire point of it. The man who built it was trying to solve exactly this problem, decades before that Indiana dentist ever climbed onto a borrowed machine. We will get to how and why it didn't work for him, and it is going to make you angry. There's more. Bolted onto the back of nearly every one of these tractors, standard equipment starting in the 1930s, is a spinning steel driveline that turns roughly 9 times every single second. 9 rotations, 1 second. A shirt cuff, a shoelace, a loose pant leg brushing that shaft doesn't get caught so much as consumed. In the time it takes you to notice something is wrong, an arm can already be gone. For most of this tractor's production run, that shaft ran completely bare. No shield, no guard, just exposed, spinning steel, a foot behind the operator's boot heel. For most of this design's long production run, standard equipment meant no cab, no roof, and nothing over the operator's head but open sky. A seatbelt, on the rare tractor that had one at all, usually arrived decades after the first machines in this bloodline had already rolled off the line, bolted onto a roll bar almost nobody had actually ordered. Now the money. In the same years, this machine was killing American farmers by the hundred. Two of the most stubborn men in industrial history dragged each other through federal court over who actually owned the idea. The final bill, $9.25 million, the largest patent settlement paid out in an American courtroom up to that point. Men who had never met a lawyer in their lives were dying under a tractor whose bloodline was, at that very moment, the subject of the most expensive lawsuit in the country. And here's the fact this entire film is built around, the one we are not going to explain yet. A small country on the other side of the Atlantic looked at this exact danger, on this exact type of machine, and had it solved by law within 20 years of the tractor's invention. The United States government did not require the fix on a single new tractor until Gerald Ford was already sitting in the White House, and when Washington finally acted, it did something almost nobody clocks at the time. It let every tractor already sitting in a barn keep right on running, exactly as it was. All of that, the flip, the shaft, the lawsuit, the 17-year gap, sits on top of one single piece of engineering, sold under 3 different company names across 3 different decades. Understanding it means understanding a fight between 2 men who never should have needed to fight at all. We are going to walk through all of it. The handshake that built this machine, the genius that made it safe, in theory, the mechanism that makes it kill, in practice, the men who paid for it, and the fix that existed the entire time, sitting on a shelf, while the bodies kept coming. A handshake, a horse, and a company that changed its mind. Before this tractor could save a single farm, it had to survive its own birth, and that almost didn't happen either. Go back to 1917. A stubborn, half-formed Irish garage owner named Harry Ferguson is standing in a field, watching a plow. Not just any plow. His plow, chained to the back of a tractor the way every plow in the world was chained to a tractor at the time, on a simple drawbar, trailing behind like a wagon. Ferguson has already figured out something the rest of the industry hasn't. When that trailing plow hits a rock or a root, the sudden resistance yanks down on the hitch point, and the whole front end of the tractor can come up off the ground. The operator is sitting directly above the rear axle when it happens. There is nowhere to go. Ferguson's answer, on that demonstration day, is a rigid triangular linkage bolting the plow directly to the tractor, instead of trailing it behind on a chain. He plows a field at 2.5 miles an hour, 4 times the pace of a team of horses on the same ground. It works. It is also, at this point, just one stubborn Irishman with an idea nobody in Detroit has heard of yet. It takes him another 2 decades of patents, prototypes, and failed partnerships to get in front of the one man who can actually build it at scale. In 1938, Ferguson shakes hands with Henry Ford. No contract. No lawyers in the room. Just a handshake, on the understanding that Ford will manufacture a tractor built entirely around Ferguson's linkage, and Ferguson will handle the implements and the selling. That handshake becomes the Ford-Ferguson 9N, and in October of 1939, it goes on sale for $585. In a decade when a lot of American farm families were still counting cash income in the low hundreds a year, that price tag is a fortune and a bargain at the same time, because for the first time, an ordinary small farmer can actually buy his way out of keeping horses. 10,000 9Ns sell in the first 12 months. Within 2 years, that number passes 78,000. By 1940, Ford has gone from selling 0 tractors in America to claiming close to 8% of the entire national market, on the strength of one machine built around one Irishman's linkage. Every one of those 78,000 tractors is carrying Ferguson's fix for the old rear flip danger. And every one of them is also, quietly, still capable of the exact same accident the day a new owner hitches a load somewhere the manual never told him to. Nobody selling that first year is thinking about it. They are thinking about the horses they just sold, and the payment they can suddenly afford. The danger did not arrive later. It rode off the assembly line inside the very first tractor sold, waiting on how carefully each of those 10,000 new owners read the instructions that came with it. This is the part of the story that almost never gets told with any teeth in it. What did this actually replace? A working farm before this tractor meant a team of horses or mules that had to be fed, harnessed, rested, and bred, whether they were working or not, plus the hired hands needed to run them. A farm after it meant one man, alone, on a machine that didn't eat when it wasn't plowing. That single change, one man replacing a team and a crew, is the engine behind everything else in this story, the accomplishment and the body count both. Think about what that actually meant on the ground. A team of horses could plow maybe 2 or 3 acres in a full day, and needed a full-time relationship to keep them fed, shod, and rested for the next morning. This tractor, in the same daylight hours, could turn several times that acreage with one operator who went home at night to a machine that needed nothing but a splash of gasoline until he came back. Farmers who had spent their whole working lives calculating everything in terms of horseflesh and hired man wages were suddenly doing the arithmetic in terms of a single monthly payment instead. That arithmetic is why 10,000 families found $585 in the middle of a decade, most of them still remembered as the worst of their lives. And it is also, quietly, the same arithmetic that would later decide who could and could not afford the extra few dollars for a roll bar nobody made them buy. The war years complicate things. Wartime production quotas force Ford to strip the tractor down into a lighter model called the 2N, sacrificing the electric starter and rubber tires just to keep the assembly line classified as light industrial output instead of something the military could commandeer. Through it all, Harry Ferguson Incorporated is selling implements and building a dealer network across the country, riding on the back of a handshake that was never written down. Then, in December of 1946, young Henry Ford II, who has just taken over the company from his grandfather, ends it. No warning that sticks, no negotiation Ferguson considers fair. The supply agreement is allowed to limp along until June of 1947, and then Ford launches its own tractor, the 8N, showing it off to 300 invited guests at a Michigan farm, just weeks after the last Ford-Ferguson machine came down the line. People who saw the new tractor that day noticed the family resemblance immediately, and more than a few of them said out loud that a lawsuit felt inevitable. It felt that way because it was going to be exactly that. Ferguson is left with a massive dealer network and nothing to sell them. He ships 25,000 British-built tractors across the Atlantic just to keep the doors open. And in January of 1948, he does something nobody in American industry had ever attempted at this scale. He sues Henry Ford II, Ford Motor Company, and the newly formed Dearborn Motors for $251 million, claiming patent infringement and a conspiracy to strangle his business. "It'll be a grand fight," Ferguson told reporters. It was. The case drags through federal court for 4 years. In April of 1952, both sides finally settle, out of court, for $9.25 million, the largest patent settlement ever paid in an American lawsuit up to that point. Ford admits, in writing, to copying Ferguson's hydraulic valve, his coupling system, and his power takeoff design. The antitrust claim gets thrown out. Ferguson gets his money. He does not get his tractor company back. While two men fought that legal war for 4 years, roughly 250,000 more of these tractors rolled off assembly lines on both sides of the Atlantic and went straight into American and European fields. The men buying them were not reading legal filings. They were reading the price tag, and the price tag said their farm could survive 1 more season. None of them were reading the fine print on exactly how the machine under that price tag worked, and that is the part of this story that actually explains the killing. The safety device that became the trigger. The safest advance in the history of the plow and the most dangerous object on most American farms turn out to be the exact same machine, for the exact same reason. Here is the mechanism behind both halves of that sentence. Picture the old way first. A plow, chained to a tractor's drawbar, dragging along behind like a trailer. The connection is loose, low, and single point. When that plow's blade catches something solid underground, a buried stone, a root, a stump, nobody dug out properly, the resistance doesn't stay down at ground level where it belongs. It travels straight up the chain and yanks on the hitch point. If that hitch point sits above the rear axle, even by a few inches, the tractor's front end starts to lift. Once the front wheels leave the ground, physics takes over completely, and the operator is riding a 2-ton lever with himself as the fulcrum. Ferguson's fix was a rigid triangle instead of a single dragging chain, 2 lower arms reaching back from low on the tractor's frame, and 1 upper arm, called the top link, running from a point above the rear axle down to the top of the plow. 3 points of contact instead of 1. In engineering terms, a triangle is the only shape that locks 2 objects together without wobble, and Ferguson had essentially welded the plow and the tractor into a single rigid body. Here is why that mattered beyond safety. The 9N itself weighed in at a bit over a ton, roughly 2,100 pounds fully fueled, noticeably lighter than a lot of the general-purpose tractors farmers had been wrestling with for the previous 2 decades. A lighter tractor is normally a weaker puller because pulling power comes from weight pressing the drive wheels into the dirt. Ferguson's triangle solved that problem too, and it is the same solution that made the whole machine survivable in the first place. That alone solved half the danger. The other half was smarter than anything else on a farm tractor at the time. Ferguson ran a heavy spring behind that top link and wired it into the tractor's hydraulic system. When the plow hit resistance in the soil, the top link pushed back against that spring. The harder the resistance, the more the spring compressed, and that compression physically triggered the hydraulic pump to lift the plow just enough to ease the load. Ease off, and the plow settled back down on its own. The operator never touched a lever. The machine was reading the ground through its own linkage and adjusting itself, continuously, without being told to. I have had my hands on that spring on a restored 9N, and it still catches me off guard every time how something that simple does something that clever. They called it draft control, and it is still, in one form or another, running on almost every tractor built on Earth today. There was a second effect nobody advertised as loudly, and it might have mattered more. That forward push through the top link didn't just control depth. It transferred the weight of the implement and the resistance of the soil against it down onto the tractor's own rear wheels. More weight on the drive wheels meant more traction, which meant Ferguson could build a tractor light enough for one ordinary man to handle, instead of the lumbering multi-ton machines that had dominated the 20s and 30s. Light, cheap, and more sure-footed than anything before it. That is the exact same trio of qualities that made it affordable enough for a small farmer to buy in the first place. So here is the reveal this whole film has been building toward. The Ferguson system was invented specifically to stop the old drawbar rear flip, and it worked, as long as you used it the way it was designed. The moment a farmer hitched a chain to anything other than the drawbar itself, the point of attachment nobody was supposed to touch, every one of Ferguson's safeguards was defeated in a single motion. That is precisely what happened to the Indiana dentist in 1995. His borrowed 1952 tractor still had a working 3-point system on the back. It was the 20 feet of log chain looped around the seat, above the drawbar, that turned the safest tractor design of its era back into the exact danger it was engineered to eliminate. The rescue device and the killing mechanism were the same 3 feet of steel, and the only difference between them was where a man decided to tie his rope. Once that pivot point is defeated, the physics move fast. The rear tires become the axis. The angle between the ground and the hitch point creates leverage, and the heavier the load and the higher that angle climbs, the less force it takes to bring the front end up. Farm safety researchers have a grim little phrase for the moment past which nothing can be done. They call it the point of no return, and on a rear overturn, it typically arrives in under a second, which is exactly why the number this film opened with is not an exaggeration. There is no version of this where the operator sees it coming in time to jump. One more piece of engineering rounds out the danger, and it arrived on these tractors as standard equipment starting in the 1930s. The power takeoff shaft, a spinning steel driveline running out the back to power everything from mowers to balers to augers. Before it existed, running a saw or a baler off a tractor's engine meant a separate stationary motor, or a long leather belt slapping off a pulley wheel, slow and awkward, and often more dangerous than the shaft that eventually replaced it. Bolt a power takeoff onto an affordable one-man tractor, and suddenly, a single machine could plow a field at sunrise and run the farm's sawmill by lunch. Nobody wanted to give that efficiency back, which is a large part of why almost nobody bothered guarding the shaft that made it possible. The 9 rotations a second this film mentioned earlier is not a scare number. It is the actual reason nobody outruns that shaft once it has hold of a sleeve. Human reaction time cannot beat something spinning that fast, so by the time a man's brain registers that his clothing has snagged, the winding has already started pulling him in. For most of this machine's production run, that shaft carried no shield at all. 2 separate safety features: the linkage that could kill you if you misused it, and the driveline that could kill you if you so much as brushed it wrong, both riding on the same tractor, both sold to farmers with essentially no instruction beyond a thin owner's manual. One man, one tractor, no one watching your back. Morning on a farm running one of these tractors looked almost peaceful, and that peace was the whole point of buying the machine in the first place. No hired hand waiting at the barn door. No team of horses to harness before the sun was fully up. No feed bill running whether the animals worked that day or not. Just one man walking out to a tractor that started with a twist of a key instead of a hand crank, climbing onto a bare metal seat that put him closer to the weather than to any kind of roof. No belt within reach, even if he'd wanted one. He'd drop the plow with a single hand lever, watch it settle itself into the ground, through the draft control spring doing its quiet, constant work, and go. That was the sales pitch, and for the vast majority of days, on the vast majority of farms, it delivered exactly that. One man could now do the work that used to take him, a hired hand, and a team of horses. He plowed alone. He mowed alone. He hauled manure, disked stubble, and pulled stumps alone. There was nobody standing at the edge of the field to see if something went wrong, and for the first time in the history of American agriculture, that was considered progress. There was nothing gentle about actually sitting on one of these machines for a full day. A bare steel seat, sprung but not padded, translating every rut and furrow straight up through the operator's spine for 8 or 10 hours at a stretch. No roof meant August sun beating straight down on a man's neck, and January wind cutting through whatever coat he'd layered on that morning. The engine ran loud enough, close enough to his knees, that plenty of men who spent 30 years on one of these tractors spent the back half of their lives half deaf in one ear and never connected the two facts. None of that showed up in the advertising either. The advertising showed a man standing tall behind a plow that used to take 3 of him. The trade-off, the one nobody put on the brochure, was that the second man who used to walk beside the team, watching the ground, watching the harness, watching the operator, was also the second set of eyes who might have shouted a warning before a wheel dropped into a washout, or before a chain got looped somewhere it shouldn't. Take that second man away, and every mistake on the tractor becomes a mistake made entirely alone. And after the war, that second man was getting harder to find anyway. Hired hands who'd left for factory work during the fighting mostly stayed gone once it ended, chasing wages no small farm could match. The tractor wasn't just an upgrade at that point. For a lot of families, it was the only remaining way to work the same acreage with half the household they used to have. Buying one wasn't really a choice between an old way and a new way anymore. It was a choice between mechanizing and going under. Consider a 41-year-old dentist, the same one from the opening of this film, who farmed his family's Indiana ground on weekends the way a lot of small landowners did by the 1990s, renting most of the acreage out and working the rest himself when he had the time. He had run this same borrowed tractor, a 1952 model from the very heart of this machine's golden era, many times before without a single problem. He knew the field, he knew the machine. He was, in every meaningful sense, an experienced operator, exactly the profile that makes up 80% of the people this tractor kills. On the day it happened, he was clearing sapling stumps, 6 to 8 inches tall, an inch and a half thick, out of wet ground scattered with tree limbs. The tractor's factory rear hitch was missing, broken off, or lost sometime before that afternoon. Instead of stopping the job, he looped a 20-foot log chain around the base of the tractor seat, wrapped the other end around a cluster of stumps, climbed up, and gave it throttle. Hold that image for a moment, because we're coming back to exactly what happened next once we've walked the staircase that led there. For now, sit with the quieter version of this machine's life, the version most owners actually got. A field at dawn, dew still on the stubble, the engine's low 4-cylinder rattle, the only sound for a mile in any direction. Exhaust and turned earth and cut grass, the particular smell that clings to a man's clothes by the end of a good day. A man alone with a plow that reads the soil for him. On a piece of ground his father may have worked with horses. For a long stretch of American farming, this was simply what a good morning looked like, and there was no reason for the man on the seat to think about hitch points or rotation speeds at all. He worried about weather and price, and whether the back 40 would drain in time to plant. The tractor itself was just the thing that got him there faster than his father had ever managed. That is exactly what makes what comes next so hard to accept. 1.5 seconds. Everything in this film has been building a staircase, and this is where it runs out. Near misses on machines like this one were common enough that most operators who ran one long enough had a story. A wheel that dropped into a rut and nearly kept going. A chain that slipped and cracked back like a whip. A PTO shaft that caught a sleeve for half a second before tearing free, with nothing worse than a bruise, and a badly frightened man standing in the field afterward. Those were the ones who got to walk back to the house and tell the story at dinner. The rear flip is only half the danger this machine carries. The other half doesn't need a chain looped in the wrong place at all. It just needs a ditch, a road shoulder, or a slope steeper than it looks from the seat. A side overturn happens when the tractor tips sideways instead of backward, usually because 2 wheels have dropped onto lower ground than the other 2, or because a turn on a hillside shifted the center of gravity past the point it could recover from. No misuse required. No broken hitch, no improvised chain. Just ordinary ground doing what ordinary ground sometimes does, under a machine with no roof to stop it from rolling all the way over once it starts. Now go back to that Indiana field. Wet ground, scattered limbs, a broken hitch, and a chain looped around the seat instead of the drawbar. The tractor takes the strain, the angle of pull, running from a point well above where the drawbar should have been, gives the load exactly the leverage it needs. The rear tires become the pivot. The front end starts to rise. There is no drawbar doing its job down low to counter it, because there is no drawbar in the chain of forces at all anymore. Just a length of steel wrapped around the one part of the tractor never designed to take that kind of load. You are the one behind the wheel now. The engine note doesn't change. There's no warning groan, no slow tip you could catch with your body weight the way you might on a slope. The front tires simply leave the dirt, and in less than a second, you have passed the point where anything you do matters. The tractor keeps rotating around that rear axle, faster than falling, because it isn't falling, it's pivoting, and pivoting concentrates all of that 2,000 pounds into a much smaller arc than gravity alone would give you. 1.5 seconds after the chain first went tight, the machine that was supposed to be the safest tractor of its generation is lying on its back, and the man who bought it, who trusted it, who had run it a dozen times before without trouble, is underneath it. He did not survive. He was found by the people who came looking for him, under the machine he had trusted enough to climb onto one more time without thinking twice about it. I have read a lot of these federal case files over the years, and they almost all end the same flat procedural way. Cause of death, contributing factors, a short list of recommendations for next time. No drama in the language at all. After enough of them, that flatness is what actually gets to you. Here is a number this film has been holding back since the opening minutes, because it deserved its own moment instead of getting buried in a list. In 1971, a Deere & Company engineer named James Arndt published what became a landmark review of tractor safety, looking back across the previous 50 years of American farming. His estimate, built from what records existed, roughly 30,000 tractor operators crushed to death under overturned tractors in that span. 30,000. And Arndt himself would have told you that number is almost certainly low, because for most of those 5 decades, nobody was required to report a farm death to anybody at all. Small operations were exempt from federal record-keeping. Family farms often just buried their own and moved on. The true toll of the exact danger this film has been describing is, quite simply, unknowable, and every serious researcher who has looked at it believes the real number sits higher than whatever gets written down. The Indiana dentist wasn't an isolated case, and he wasn't the last. And the next one shows the other half of this danger in action. 2 years later, in Nebraska, a 23-year-old farmer was backing a similar tractor down a dirt access road, trimming trees along the edge of his family's land. No chain, no broken hitch, nothing misused. The left rear wheel simply went off the edge of the road, down an embankment angled at close to 40 degrees. That was enough. The tractor rolled sideways, once, completely, and came down on top of him in the ditch below. No cab, no rollover protection. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Different state, a different decade, a different type of overturn entirely, and yet the outcome lines up with the Indiana case almost exactly. Because the one piece of equipment that stops both kinds of accident from turning fatal is the same piece of equipment neither tractor had. And that is the word that should be sitting heavy in your chest right now. Could have. Because the fix for exactly this kind of death did not need to be invented after these 2 men died. It already existed, tested and working, on the other side of an ocean, while a dentist in Indiana and a young farmer in Nebraska climbed onto tractors that had never been required to carry it. The fix existed. They just didn't build it into yours. A cheap steel frame could have saved every man this film has named so far, and it existed years before either of them ever climbed onto a tractor. In 1954, engineers in Sweden began serious testing on exactly that. A simple frame mounted behind the operator's seat, built to do one job: create a survivable pocket of space if the tractor went over. A rollover protective structure. Not complicated, not expensive by the standards of the machine it was bolted to. Sweden offered it to farmers as an option starting that same year. Almost nobody bought it. Given the choice between paying extra for a piece of steel they hoped they'd never need and saving that money for seed or fuel or the mortgage, Swedish farmers behaved exactly the way farmers everywhere behaved. They skipped it. So in 1959, the Swedish government stopped offering the choice. Every new tractor sold in the country, by law, had to carry a rollover structure. No exceptions, no opt-out. The results did not take long to show up in the numbers. Fatal rollovers in Sweden dropped from roughly 17 per 100,000 tractors in the years before the law to something close to a rounding error afterward. One later study tracked 40 documented rollover accidents in Sweden across a 7-year stretch after the law took hold. 39 of those 40 operators walked away. The single death that did occur happened because the operator tried to jump clear instead of staying inside the protected zone, and was crushed anyway. 39 survivors out of 40 rollovers, on a danger that had been killing American farmers by the thousand in the exact same years, using a fix that cost a fraction of the tractor's own price tag. This is the fact this entire film has been circling since the opening minute, and here it is in full. The United States did not require rollover protection on a single new agricultural tractor until October 25, 1976, 17 years. That is how long it took the American system to catch up to a solution Sweden had already proven, in the field, with real farmers and real tractors, using real numbers anyone could look up. And even that rule, once it finally arrived, only reached tractors run by hired employees on operations large enough to fall under federal enforcement. A family working its own ground, on its own tractor, answered to nobody but itself. It gets worse before it gets better. American manufacturers had started offering rollover bars as an option years before the federal mandate, roughly the same window Sweden tried and abandoned in the middle 1960s. And American farmers, like Swedish farmers before them, mostly said no. The same optional bar that could have kept that Indiana dentist and that Nebraska farmer alive was available, for money, and buyers overwhelmingly passed on it. Exactly the pattern Sweden had already seen and already fixed with a law. Here is the part that turns this from a tragedy into something closer to a decision. When Washington finally acted in 1976, it wrote the rule to cover only tractors manufactured after that date. It was never made retroactive. Every one of these machines already sitting in a barn, on a used lot, passed down from father to son, the entire multi-decade run of 9Ns and 2Ns and 8Ns and TE20s and TO20s that this film has spent its runtime on was allowed to keep working, forever, exactly as unprotected as the day it rolled off the line. A federal researcher would later estimate that well over half of all tractors still in use in the United States lacked rollover protection entirely, and that most of those had been built before 1971. The year the option first became widely available. The regulation didn't retire the danger. It grandfathered it. That is why the Indiana dentist's tractor, built in 1952, was still legally, completely fine to be out in a field in 1995, 43 years and one federal safety law later, exactly as bare as the day it left the factory floor. By 1953, the two halves of this story had formally merged. Massey Harris, a Canadian farm equipment giant, bought out Ferguson's company outright, and the two names were stitched together into one. Massey Harris Ferguson, soon shortened to the name that stuck. Massey Ferguson. The British TE20 kept rolling out of the Coventry factory under that new badge until 1956, with over 517,000 built there alone. 2/3 of them shipped out to farms across the world. Add the tens of thousands built at Ferguson's own Detroit plant, plus the original Ford-Ferguson run, and you are looking at close to 1 million machines built on this exact bloodline, this exact linkage, this exact set of trade-offs, most of them sold before anyone was legally required to protect the man sitting on top of them. That is the actual arithmetic behind the claim this film opened with. No single tractor family sold more of these machines, for more decades, across more of the exact window when a rollover meant almost certain death, than the one carrying this badge. Other tractors have killed farmers too, plenty of them. None of them did it at this scale, for this long, while the fix sat unused a few years down the road in Sweden. That is not a guess dressed up as a fact. It is what happens when you put 1 million lightweight, affordable, bare-headed tractors into a nation's fields for the better part of 40 years, and wait until the last possible year of that run to even start requiring the one part that could have changed the ending. Harry Ferguson himself never got to see the Massey Ferguson name become one of the most recognized in world agriculture. The 4-year legal war with Ford had cost him money, dealers, and by most accounts, a great deal of his own health. He sold his stake, kept inventing almost until the end, and died in October of 1960 at his home in England. The cause was a barbiturate overdose. The inquest could not say for certain whether it was accidental or deliberate, and it is not this film's place to say either. What can be said plainly is that the man who spent 40 years trying to build the tractor that wouldn't flip over backward did not live to see the 15 years it would still take his own invention's descendants to get a mandatory roll bar, let alone the 17 it took after the country that solved it first had already shown everyone exactly how. And the machines themselves never really left. Walk any farm auction in the American Midwest today, and you will still find 9 N's and 8 N's and little gray Fergies parked in the back row, running, most of them, on the same engines and the same 3-point linkage this film just spent an hour explaining. Restoration clubs trade parts for them across 3 continents. Some are polished up for county fair judging, paint gleaming, tires blacked, never touching dirt again. A great many more are still exactly what they were built to be, a cheap, reliable, one-man plow, still doing the job on small farms from Ohio to rural France to the hills outside Nairobi, more than 80 years after that first handshake between an Irish inventor and an American car maker. Most of them, the ones built in this machine's long golden window before 1976, still carry nothing over the operator's head but the sky that was there the day they were built. The 3-point hitch Ferguson patented in a Belfast filing back in 1925 still earns its keep every single day. It rides as standard equipment on nearly every tractor manufactured on the planet today, from the smallest garden compact to machines with air-conditioned cabs and satellite guidance. Every farmer who backs up to hitch an implement this afternoon is using a triangle of steel that traces directly back to a stubborn man in a field in 1917, plowing at 4 times the speed of a horse, trying to solve one specific, deadly problem. He solved it. The industry around him simply decided, for the better part of 2 decades, that solving it for the men already out in the field could wait. Some of those men are still out there right now, on machines built before the law ever caught up to them. And the fix that could have kept every one of them safe was sitting on a shelf, tested and proven, before most of those tractors were ever sold. They don't make them like that anymore. Not the machines, and not the choice to leave so many of them